All right, so let's briefly discuss populism. Then I will present a video lecture on labor and some of the intricacies of that. Now, when we look at populism, we are concerned with something that was, and I'm going to go with a quote from the best scholar on populism, who is Lawrence Goodwin, Goodwin. His book was called The Populist Moment. And this is what he described populism: Southern in origin, national in purpose, and radical in ideology. The populist movement can best be described as a truly democratic movement that may indeed have been ahead of its time. Now, when you hear some of the goals, some of the methods of the populist movement, light bulbs will go off. Wow, I've heard of this before. Wait a minute, isn't this something that the progressives embraced, et cetera, et cetera? The populists definitely were ahead of their time. Now, when we get into their history here, you'll see kind of some of the weaknesses, some of the reasons why they may not have garnered the strength that they may have even 25 years later. But part of this also has to deal with this, what I had talked about previously, the laissez-faire mentality. Populists believe that the government should be more active and it should help those in rural areas. So let's get to the populists real quick against Lawrence Goodwin. His The Populist Moment is the best book on this issue. What were the problems that led to the creation of the populists? First of all, we have an unfair crop lien system. Now, what is a crop lien system? Merchants provided supplies to small farm owners in return for liens on future crops. Thus, there is a basic lack of control. The crop lien system, for example, allowed creditors to determine the worth of the crops, leaving farmers in perpetual debt. So if things went well, then the lenders would get more, or the merchants would get more of their profits. If things didn't go well, hey, the farmer still had to pay back the merchant, and he or she could lose everything that they had. So this crop lien system very much favored merchants, and it put farmers at a disadvantage. Number two, we have a decline in commodity prices due to overproduction and increasing competition in world markets. There is high debt due to the vicious cycle of decreasing prices and the need to increase production. The basics of supply and demand. There is too much supply, and that limits demand, and then that will affect pricing, obviously. Now, these are basic free market capitalist issues that many farmers just simply did not understand. And again, they overproduced. You'd think that would be a good thing. It's not. And that is something we'll see with the Great Depression as well later down the road. Number three, one major issue the populists faced was the power of the railroad. Now, small farmers were charged more than manufacturers to go shorter distances. Now, these were all deals that the railroad had worked out with large companies, with corporations, with these large manufacturers, but small farmers were left out. And many farmers blamed the railroad for their problem and for their economic issues. Now, to an extent, this was correct. Railroads did have the power. There's little regulation because of laissez-faire and that embrace. So the farmers are very much left on their own to battle railroads who decide what their policies are going to be without any real regulation. A fourth issue, isolation, both social and political. Those in the Great Plains were thousands of miles from D.C. They were often ignored. Their issues were not considered, even though they were represented in Congress. Now, we also have the populists don't, because of their isolation, and anybody who's grown up on a farm may be familiar with this, you're literally isolated. You're socially isolated as well. So not only were they thousands of miles from Washington, D.C., they're often not close to each other and fellow farmers. So they didn't get together as much as they may have previously. They weren't able to discuss these issues, and significantly, they weren't able to organize. Now, as the late 19th century goes on, and as these different groups start up, that will change, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, one thing Goodwin talks about are the four stages of any successful reform movement. The first is formation. The second stage is recruitment. The third is education, and the fourth is politicization. Now, this, the populist revolt, will trace how these plain people succeeded in each stage until the ultimate failure in the final stage. Now, Goodwin points out that farmers initially organized locally as the grangers. Efforts were made to bring people together by dances, by other social gatherings. These were social events, but they became political events because people began to discuss the issues that they faced and how to rectify them. They realized they had shared problems, that there were other people who had the same issues, and they also didn't know how to go about it. So this provides some progress. And we have Granger laws would help establish maximum railroad rates in some states. So there is some change that comes from these. Now, the farmers' alliances were established and became the political activist group of these farmers. They worked together. They emphasized cooperation. They emphasized education. They used newspapers, lectures, and conventions to help educate their members. They sought to empower the individual through collective means. Now, this was an attempt at true bottom-up democracy. Members were elected to local and state legislatures and enacted laws that assisted agriculture in different ways. Leaders such as Jerry Simpson, S.O. Dawes, and Charles McCune helped to bring the plain people together. Traveling lecturers helped to educate these folks on problems and potential solutions. The concepts of the cooperative and McCune's sub-treasury system were espoused in an attempt to rectify crop lien system. To get out of debt, they favored inflation, and they supported the Greenback Party and later free silver. This is the idea that money is backed by silver, would be more available to commoners than just gold. And in this way, they were correct. They developed a culture of insurgents. And by doing this would foment revolution and change in some ways. Now, from all this would be established the Populist Party. Now, the Populist Party believes that the government should be increasingly powerful, that the government should be increasingly active. They believe that there should be a federal income tax and that this income tax should be graduated. In other words, those who make more money should pay more money. Those who make less should pay less, or even none at all. They believed in the popular election of senators. They believed in direct democracy. They believed in federal control of the railroad. But significantly, they worked within the system. So I said that they were revolutionary, and many of their ideas were considered revolutionary, especially the ideas of organizing those in rural areas. But what is significant is that they believed in evolution, not revolution. And when I say that, revolution means massive change, a change in structure. Evolution means a gradual change and affecting change through the system as it exists. Social Democrats would be that type of group. But the populists sought evolutionary change, not revolutionary change. Now, they would run Weaver for president in 1892 with little success, but it did get these issues out in the open, and their platform was more readily accepted and discussed by many, especially after the Panic of 1893. In 1896, we see a significant change. William Jennings Bryan, who is a Democrat and a Nebraskan, is espoused by populists, and he would espouse the populist platform. Democratic voters across the West and the South would also embrace it. The populists faced a conundrum at this point, though. Would they continue with their own party, the Populist Party, or would they support the man who supported them? William Jennings Bryan, the great commoner, a 36-year-old from Nebraska. But again, a staunch Democrat. They would nominate him as their candidate as well. Now, William McKinley would win the election, but there are some serious divisions within this election that show how divided the country is in many ways. First of all, we have country versus city. Bryan took all the rural areas. He dominated in agrarian areas, but he did not take one northeastern state. As far as the city, that went to McKinley. There was a lack of unity. Now, laborers did not want inflation, thus they feared free silver. Again, to go back, populists did support inflation because they wanted prices to go up so that they would get more money for their goods. Laborers, again, think if you're an industrial worker. You don't want these prices to go up. You could barely afford living as it is. You've read about this in your textbook. So, laborers in the cities and laborers in the rural areas did not work together in this way. And this is significant because if the populists had been able to work with labor, there may have been fundamental change. They may have been able to get their president nominated and elected. It could have been quite different. Now, a third issue that affected this election was a strengthening economy. I talked about 1893, which was rough, and that helped to bring some of these issues out in the open. But by 1896, The economy was in the uptick, the insurgent was somewhat tamed, and people did not want to, so to speak, rock the boat. They were happy with how things were going. They did not want to change. So this gets to the end of the Populist Party. They are pretty much taken over by the Democrats at this point. The decision to support Bryan as a Democrat fundamentally changed the Populist Party, ultimately ending it. And in that way, I mean, it is kind of problematic, but they were being somewhat pragmatic. They knew if there's already a Democratic candidate who espouses all their ideas, why would they put out another candidate who would only take votes away from him? So the People's Party failed partially because the rank and file of the movement were just unwilling to escape ties to traditional political and economic power structures in which power was concentrated. Additionally, sectional, racial, and religious divisions were perpetuated, which prevented full support of the party in 1892 and, more importantly, in the nomination of a presidential candidate in 1896. There was no embrace of labor, as I mentioned, which would have strengthened the sense of this bottom-up democracy and possibly could have forced change. The denouement of the movement can be traced to this fusion of the People's Party with the Party of the Fathers, the traditional Democratic Party, and its free silver platform. After the failure of 1896, the movement lost power, it faded away, and thus ended the largest democratic mass movement in American history. Now, in some ways, the failure of populism was the failure of labor. At times it was too exclusive, it prevented expansion of membership, and by doing that, it limited potential strength of the movement. There was disagreement on principles, there was disagreement on goals. Should they form a political party? What monetary policy should they take? And of course, there's the power of corporate entities. Banks did not fold, just as industrial giants did not cave. But one can also say that the populists succeeded. They got ideas out in the open. They got people to discuss these issues. They raised awareness of the problems facing the American farmer. And as we will see over the next few weeks, many of their principles and goals were carried out by a later reform movement, the progressives. They would adopt many of their issues. Now, just going back to some of the things that I had mentioned earlier about the Populist Party, they wanted increased power of the government, again, espousing the general welfare state and what we would see with progressives and very much throughout the 20th century. They were proponents of a graduated federal income tax. This would come a few decades later, but it would come. They favored popular election of senators rather than having the state legislature elect senators. They wanted the people to elect the senators. Revolutionary, right? So again, they got these ideas out in the open, and they also provided somewhat of a blueprint for the progressive movement. Now, the progressive movement would focus on the cities, whereas populists focused on the countryside, but again, these ideas would transfer over. I will next talk about American labor, the different variances of it, and why it also failed. And again, it failed in many of the same ways that the Populist Party